Hello there, Emma Thorne Lees here from emmathornelees.com. Today we're talking about one of the realities of being a midlife parent, a midlife mum, and facing the growing up of our kids, the moving on with our kids, and the potential of empty nest, or open nest as I prefer to call it, as it sounds so much more freeing and liberating and empowering, that our kids can come and go and we're still part of our family. September, back to school, kids leaving home, going to uni, on a gap year, moving forward with their lives. The seasons change. The photos of our kids on their next first day of school or uni compared to their first day at school many years ago looms in our memory. Lists and preparations for those leaving home for the first time, launching into a new chapter, whilst remembering all the previous chapters with us in our home. Temperatures changing and light fading, another reminding of the passing of time, the approach of inevitable change, and winter, for us in the northern hemisphere at least. The passing of time, changes, all reminders of life evolving, the fragility of life, of beginnings and endings. Transitions can be tough and also tender for us and for our kids. But for us mums, it can hit us in so many ways. Excitement for what is next for them, fear of letting go, uncertainty on how life will now look for us, readiness for a new phase of life, grief for what has been. Maybe a sense of loss of our children, even if we rationally know that they are still our babies. That we know that we will still see them and still be there for them. That this is temporary, an adjustment, and that they cannot and should not be with us forever. And yet it still hurts. And maybe one moment we are mourning the passing of time, the evolution into a new day-to-day life and way of being a mum. And then the next, we can hardly wait for them to move on, or we can see how they are totally ready for what is next, and we can't hold them back. The nuances of feeling can change by the minute and are infinite. So how do we hold these mixed feelings? How can we let go of our children, especially without catastrophizing and feeling that this is the end? How can we process it all without negatively impacting our children? How do we move through it and onwards, especially in the moments when the emotions might feel paralysing? How do we not put ourselves under too much pressure for us to be okay? To have a new routine, a new normal, all set up and ready to go, and be excited and ready for the next stage. I see many tips for parents facing empty or open nest, or talking about grief or tough emotions. Tips from our Western culture so often emphasise the importance of letting go, getting on with life and focusing on other or new things. This type of advice is all well and good, but in my experience the reality is that it's so often putting a band-aid over the situation and can end up keeping us stuck and damaging our emotional, physical well-being and prolonging and deepening our pain. This can also come out sideways, for example, with outbursts or eruptions with our children, partners or elsewhere, or with unhealthy behaviours with maybe food or alcohol as we try and find ways to cope. In my experience and with many clients, the most important and often neglected first steps is that we need to acknowledge how we are feeling and allow ourselves to feel it. If we don't, it can end up creating way more problems for ourselves and damage the very things we are trying to protect. It doesn't mean we have to spend days moping and wallowing, offloading to anyone or everyone, particularly our kids. It's more about finding healthy ways for us to feel and process our emotions, our grief, whatever we are feeling, on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. So here are 12 tips on how we can help support ourselves and move forward when we are finding things tough, whether facing empty or open nest, or finding the passing of time hard, whatever is challenging or tough for us right now. Number 1, acknowledge how we are feeling. Whether it feels relatively fleeting or something that feels deeper, acknowledging and or labelling our emotions is a really important first step. It can feel very counterintuitive to many of us, particularly in Western culture, to just sit with our uncomfortable feelings without having to do, change or control anything. To just be with ourselves, hold the complex emotions, sit with them and be with them in ways maybe that our parents never did with us, and maybe we've never had it modelled to us either. But in my painful experience, ignoring, dismissing, masking or pretending we aren't feeling something can just make it worse and keep us even more stuck. For me personally, I am conscious that I have done a lot of ignoring, masking, dismissing and pretending in the past when I have felt something challenging or have really difficult thoughts or emotions, particularly with pain, stress, fear, indecision, uncertainty, sadness and grief. I used to regularly turn to food, alcohol and numbing behaviours to escape, which ultimately resulted for me in chronic anxiety and depression, and I know it does for many others too. The first way I started to heal and break free from my pain and suffering and my mental health struggles was to get in touch with what I was actually feeling and acknowledge it. It sounds really so simple, but it's not always quite so easy in practice, but it takes just that, practice. Whether it's mentally acknowledging and labelling our emotions and feelings, journaling about them, meditating on them, experimenting with mindfulness practices, making voice notes on them, these can all be really helpful with acknowledging and sitting with and processing our emotions. We just have to find what's most helpful to us. If we allow ourselves to see and feel the feelings, this helps them let them move through us, and then they will pass much more easily. A quote from Tara Brach is that I recently read in the book of My Stroke of Insight by brain scientist Jill Balty-Taylor that the natural lifespan of an emotion, the average time it takes for it to move through the nervous system and body, is only 1.5 minutes. After that, we need thoughts to keep the emotion rolling. So if we wonder why we lock into painful emotional states like anxiety, depression or rage, we need to look no further than our own endless stream of inner dialogue. The second way that can really help us move through our emotions and move on with our lives is, once we've acknowledged those feelings, to bring self-compassion. And I know you might be saying, yeah, I've heard that before. Gosh, we all know that that's what we need to be doing or think we need to be doing. But the reality is, when we do show ourselves some self-compassion, some kindness and comfort ourselves with our pain, our suffering, our challenges, it really does help us move through it. What can be called being our own parent or inner parent, witnessing our emotions, nurturing and comforting ourselves, is a really simple but very empowering practice. Again, it is quite counterculture and can take some time and patience to get into the habit of remembering to give ourselves compassion, but it can really make all the difference. A quote again from Tara Brach, I will link below to her website in the comments and show notes. When someone says to us, as Thich Nhat Hanh suggests, "Darling, I care about your suffering," a deep healing begins. So when someone says to us, which can be ourselves, "I care about your suffering," a deep healing begins. Now this is quite different to the keep calm and carry on style attitude, particularly for us Brits, which basically expects us to show a stiff upper lip, to tough things out and battle through. Just ignore it, get on with something else, it will eventually all go away. But using self-compassion and kindness can be seen as a weakness. It can be seen as something kind of a bit wimpy or wet even, but the reality is actually something very different. We wouldn't expect somebody else going through pain or suffering just to grin and bear it, so why do it to ourselves? A stronger, much more empowering practice is to hold ourselves with the same compassion and gentleness, just like we would with a physical wound or with a child. Give ourselves the care and attention that we need and we deserve. And remembering that this self-compassion is not just a one-time practice, we need to repeat it to give ourselves what we most need in any given moment, even if it is to give ourselves a hug. The third way that we can really help ourselves move through tough times is to connect to our bodies. Feeling into our bodies where we feel hard stuff is another powerful way to connect with ourselves so we can heal our own suffering and pain. For some of us, connecting to our body is hard, particularly if we disconnected to it due to a tough upbringing or trauma. So it can be something we have to go gently with kindness, with patience, and or do so with a professional. One very effective way that I have found helped me really connect with my emotions, my body, is through a visualization and exercise based on ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy, from Dr. Russ Harris, and I will share the link to the YouTube video below. I do really recommend his book, The Happiness Trap, as well, by Dr. Russ Harris. Next way is to reach out. Now, it might be obvious, but it's also important for us to talk to someone about how we are feeling. A trusted friend, a trusted family member, colleague, therapist, counsellor, coach, mentor, someone that we feel comfortable, someone we know that will listen and hear us. Sharing how we are feeling can really help us by externalizing our thoughts and feelings, get it out of our heads, being seen and being heard. Sharing our thoughts and emotions can help create new awareness and also help us separate between our thoughts rather than identifying with them so much. In my experience, we often don't even need advice or guidance, but more to have our experiences reflected back to us and be asked questions so we can go within, find our own answers and trust our own inner wisdom. Although if we do feel we need guidance, it can obviously be helpful to ask for that too, particularly if someone has encountered a similar situation. But the most important thing is to be listened, to have a really good listener and to be heard and to be seen. Number 5, movement. We might not feel like moving our bodies, especially when we're having a tough time. Perhaps we just don't feel like doing very much at all, to be perfectly honest. But sometimes emotions can get stuck in our bodies and keep us feeling stuck and living in our heads too. Going for a walk in nature, doing some form of exercise you love, whether it's yoga, Zumba, Pilates, kickboxing, the gym, swimming, moving our bodies can help us process our emotions, provided we've also acknowledged them and held them with some self-compassion. So we're not using the exercise to run away from our feelings or using exercise compulsively, like as a numbing behaviour. Of course, the releasing of endorphins does help us too. Number 6, allow ourselves to experiment with what works for us. Once we feel a bit more ready to move forward, giving ourselves permission to try something new. It doesn't have to be something huge. And we also give ourselves permission to make mistakes, to fail. How do we know when we are ready? I love this thought-provoking quote from James Clear. It generally feels better to run towards something than to run away from something. Focus on what is pulling you in, not what you are trying to avoid. It's generally better to run towards something that focusing on pulling you in rather than something you're trying to avoid. Now, the way I interpret this is, instead of doing activities or things in life to try and run away from our pain or difficulties or anything that's feeling uncomfortable in ourselves, in our body, in our heads, instead we are listening to what we really want to create inside, that we are moving towards trying to feel more alive, more energized, more at peace, more calm, that we're not trying to run away from things, we're trying to move towards something that we really want and we really desire. It takes some self-honesty, self-knowledge, and lots of reflection. Now, we may not ever feel fully ready to try something new and move on, or to do something out of our comfort zone. But if we do focus on something we want to create, to feel, then it can help us to edge out of what feels like a safe place, to try something new, something that even excites us. As we give ourselves permission to experiment and try new things, I find it really important to also remind myself that just because one path or one thing works for one person, it might not help me. I need to listen to myself. So just because somebody else has found it really helpful to try meditation, for example, or to go running, it doesn't mean that that's the best thing for me. Number 7, letting down our load. Sometimes when it all gets just a bit too heavy, a bit too much, we need to just let ourselves set down our load, our emotional load, to emotionally and physically release what is bothering us and consciously disengage from it. This might be in saying we're just going to forget about it for a bit and go and watch a movie, go out for dinner, do something fun or nurturing or relaxing, and give ourselves full permission to just be with it and not think about what has been eating away with us or what we've been struggling with. Even if it's for 10 minutes, releasing the load for a little bit can feel freeing. Number 8, gratitude. I know gratitude has become a bit of a cliche these days, but it is also really powerful. Not to avoid what we're finding hard, but also to include what is good in our lives. The warm, sometimes fleeting moments, or glimmers as they're starting to be called these days. Feeling the sun on our face, watching a bird fly, hearing our children laugh, tasting fully delicious food, being fully present, dancing to our favourite song. It doesn't have to be anything big or fancy. Being in the moment for when the good things happen, and then reflecting on them with gratitude at the end of our day, reminds ourselves of some of the good points in life too. I have found that it also really helps me look for and create more of those glimmers of light and hope too. Number 9, adding good things. Adding some things that nurture and nourish us into the mix may sound obvious, but we can often forget it and turn to things that are not quite so nurturing for our soul. Sprinkling in 1 or 2 things that we love can also help ease the burden, enrich our lives, and look after our mental and physical health. This might be something as simple as reading more, trying a new recipe, exploring something new or something new, trying or revisiting a hobby, an exercise class, seeing a friend, or spending just 5 minutes longer with a cuppa and savouring it. Giving ourselves the opportunity to add in what feels good to us. I'm going to share in the show notes below a podcast, a Gathering Gold podcast with Cheryl Paul and Victoria Russell. It's all about adding good things, which I found really warming and nourishing too. Number 10, a perspective shift. Once we have sat with our emotions and given ourselves compassion and what we most need, we might feel ready to consider a perspective shift. For example, an alternate perspective to seeing empty, or open as I prefer, nest, or our kids not wanting to spend as much time with us, or seeing them grow old or our parents grow old, is we that view this time as an opportunity for personal and or professional growth, rather than just loss or change. We can value the fact that we have done a good job in enabling our kids to get their own independence and freedom, and see it as a space to start focusing more on our passions, hobbies, or even a new or up-levelled career, maybe volunteering opportunities, reconnecting friendships. I could go on. For example, one of my clients, Jane, whose name I've changed, was navigating a crossroads as her children got older and left home, combined with the end of her marriage, and once she moved through a lot of her challenging emotions, she reconnected to who she was and what she wanted in this phase. Together, we created a personal manifesto, as she liked to call it. Included exercise, nutritious foods that she loved, personal development, regular connection with friends near and far, learning, tuning into her desires and what felt nourishing to her in this transitional phase of life. Having this manifesto was something for her to really get going on and focus on daily. It truly reflected who she was, where she was in that moment, and what she wanted to work towards more. It became her foundation and gave her a new lease of life to move on. Number 11, rediscovering identity. I know it can also feel a bit cliched, but rediscovering who we are beyond our role as a mother can also be an important step as our kids become more independent in their teens and beyond. We may have put our career or other activities and interests on hold while raising our children. For example, I have rediscovered my love of football that I loved as a child. Now my kids are in their mid-teens and I love it, as it brings me both exercise and a wonderful community. A good first step in starting to rediscover who we are now at this stage of life, bear in mind that we evolve as we move through our lives, is to first connect with what our values are right now, what is most important to us. We can then start to see what parts of us are in alignment with our values and what we'd like to include more, and maybe what we'd like to take out, what we'd like to move towards. This was a really powerful exercise for Mary, whose name I've changed as well. Realised that she'd lost a bit of a touch of who she was and what she really wanted, and she was just going through the motions of her life. But together we worked to help her reconnect to her, listen to herself, to have that self-awareness and self-knowledge. And she slowly realised that she wanted to not only change her career, but she wanted to change country. Meanwhile, for Jill, another client whose name I've changed, reevaluated and reconnected with how important it was for her to spend time with her family and quality time alone too. In practice, she decided to practice not being on her phone so much, for example, particularly in the evenings, and just setting it aside, and also started to invest more time in reading rather than scrolling, which felt much more nourishing to her to have that really quality alone time. Again, examples and ways that we change our life don't have to be massive, but they can really make a difference. And last but not least, a rebirth. Whilst much of our Western culture can talk about the negative of midlife, menopause and all that comes with it, I prefer, once we've moved through the stages, we really listen to ourselves and given ourselves what we need, to embrace the more empowering Japanese perspective of midlife called konenki. Midlife and menopause in Japanese culture is an opportunity for renewal, rebirth and fresh starts. I will link to my post all about konenki below in the comments. But rediscovering who we are and revisiting what we most want can feel quite a challenge. It can also be so liberating. Another client of mine, Michelle, whose name I've also changed, gave herself full permission to connect to who she was at this point in her life and think about what she really wanted for this next stage, rather than prioritising everyone else or caring what they thought, which can also be a sneaky one. She wanted to feel really excited about the next stage, but not go too bold or too out of her comfort zone. And now Michelle is planning to visit Asia to develop her yoga practice and work for a couple of months later this year. For me personally, whilst my kids are still living at home, or I should say kids, they're teens now, I have found it really empowering to look at this phase of my life as a way to embrace who I really am and reconnect to me in a way that I have never done before in my life. In midlife, I've stopped dyeing my hair. I decided to do that partly as I was sick of dyeing it, to be honest, but also because I wanted to be more authentic and show the real me. As I've looked also for ways to be more present, less distracted, less living in my head and overthinking, been a bit of a worry in my past. I have included more movement in my life that feels good to me, swimming, football, walking. I've listened to myself and trusted myself so much more, even when it feels hard or counterculture. I've developed my own tools and practices and worked with others to develop tools and practice that really help me listen to myself and be more present and connected. And doing things that were counterculture, and I historically have really cared what other people thought of me, I decided to stop drinking alcohol in April 2018. As for me, it didn't feel good for me physically or mentally anymore, and I knew that it wasn't helping me to create the life that I wanted to create. I see midlife as actually having given me the opportunities to reevaluate who I am and what I most want, without me always worrying about everyone else or what they think. And it's actually been quite freeing, although it has also been scary at times. On reflection, September can be a challenging month. It's a month that lots of change comes, and it can also be the autumnal season of our lives, where we see our kids getting older and moving on with their lives. It can be tough, but it's also so tender. The emotions, the feelings can be so close to the surface. Giving ourselves the compassion, support and love that we most need right now is so important, first and foremost. No one ever truly healed and moved on by pretending it wasn't happening or chastising ourselves to get over it. We wouldn't do that to a physical wound. Why do it to an emotional one? Yes, midlife and this phase of our lives provides opportunities and hope. It also brings a whole swirl of emotions and feelings for us. It's important that we get the support we need and reach out when we feel we need it too. I'm sharing a poem below as well that I've found quite pertinent and powerful to reflect on all the complex emotions of letting our children go and allowing them to fly. I hope it might be of some comfort to those feeling particularly vulnerable right now. It's called On Children by Khalil Gibran. Your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows might go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. That poem is, as I said, from Khalil Gibran, from The Prophet, that was from 1923. Such wise and confronting words as well, but also something that really touched my heart. As always, I would absolutely love to hear your reflections, questions, comments, feedback at this time of your life, and whatever the stage you are with your kids, teen, adults, please do share below. I read and comment on all the responses I get, and I also connect with you if you'd like to in my free Facebook community with other amazing midlife women, and also if you'd like to have a free chat with me about how we might work together. Obviously zero obligation, 30 minutes just to explore what's going on for you and what might be helpful for you. Thank you so much for listening and being part of this journey together, and for empowering you and your world. Thanks so much.